Welcome to Mooney Reads. My name is Beck, and today I'm going to be talking about what I read in the month of February. In February, I participated in the Blackathon, and I participated in and co-hosted the Readathon. So I'm going to go through a little bit of stats and then get into what I actually talked about and how they fit in with some of the readathons. So to start off with, I read 12 books this month, 5 of which were on audio. About 2/3 of what I read was nonfiction, which is actually opposite of what I have read, at least over the past couple of years. I've read about a third nonfiction, so I kind of like that I read a little bit more nonfiction than normal. Of what I read, 3 of the nonfictions were speech and or essay collections, and one of them was a poetry collection. The rest were kind of just your typical nonfiction. With the fiction that I read, 2 of them were kids' books, 2 of them were graphic novels. One was middle grade, one was young adult, and I read 1 young adult contemporary novel. On Storygraph, one of the stats that they give you is the mood of what you read, and I think that's interesting, so I would like to start looking at that now for each month. So this month, the mood was reflective. A lot of what I read was very reflective, apparently. And that was about a third of what I read was reflective, and then informative and challenging are the next 2 categories that fill out a little bit more than half of what I read. With all 3 of those together. So that's the vibe for this month's reading. So far as star rating goes, I think I had a pretty good month. A lot of what I read was 5-star. I think I only had 1 read that was actually really disappointing. And even then, the first half of it was really good. So I'll get into it, and I'll go in order of when I read them. So first I have We Do This Till We Free Us, Abolitionist Organizing and Transforming Justice by Mariame Kaba. This is a collection of articles, essays, and interviews by Mariame Kaba on prison and police abolition. This collection is put into 7 different parts. The beginning is kind of like an overview, and then within each part, she talks about different issues within prison abolition. This was an excellent book. I gave it 5 stars, and I would highly recommend it to everyone. If you're just starting to learn about prison abolition, or if you don't really know that much about it at all, I think this is a really good starting place. She addresses a lot about what it is. She addresses, I think, some of what I see as some of the first questions that people come up with when learning about it. But even if you're already fully invested in prison abolition, you should still read this book because she has a lot of incredible insight. And honestly, at least of the books that I've read, a lot of them really focus on the problems with the prison and not really solution, or like it'll be where there will be a whole book about the issue and then there will be a chapter on abolition. And this doesn't really do that. The whole thing, like, obviously she talks about the issues because you can't not if you're talking about prison abolition. But throughout it, she talks about how we can change ideas on how we might or what needs to be considered with all of this. So this was really excellent, and I could not recommend it enough. So far as readathons go, I forgot to mention the Buzzwordathon. The Buzzwordathon is year-round, and for this one fit for this month's, which was to read a book with a pronoun in the title, and we and us, I think, are pronouns. So it fits for that. This also fit for the Rent Readathon for Joanne, because this is centering law and a nonfiction. Angel, because this has anti-capitalist themes. And Collins, because this is a book that teaches you something. Next, I listened to Power to the People, the Black Panthers Speak. Now this, technically not a book. It is a collection of speeches by Fred Hampton, and this is actually audio of him, as well as some other people. It includes audio snippets of news footage and interviews with other people. However, it was put out on Hoopla as a book. It's on Goodreads and Storygraph like a book, so I'm counting it as a book. And honestly, I would really love to see this, and really more of his stuff kind of put out, like a collection that's like that, like we have for other folks. This was really great. I will say with the audio, it is very hard to hear. I had to listen to some of the speeches multiple times just because of the audio quality, which, like, these were recorded in, like, the 60s, on equipment that might have not been the best. So that's why some of it sounds a little deep fried. But it's still really good. It's really impactful, and I really loved that they included interviews and news footage stuff that contextualized where he was and the reaction to him. They talk about his death, which he was murdered by the police in his own home. They came into his house in the middle of the night, shot everyone up. There's evidence of foul play beforehand as well. And so he was assassinated in his house. So that's really important to know about. He was a figure in the Black Panther Party and was one of the big people responsible for some of the work that they did with other groups. He put together the Rainbow Coalition. So, important figure, and the speeches and essays were very good. And going along with that, which might be skipping around chronologically a little bit, but that's fine, I also read Black Against Empire, The History and Politics of the Black Panther Party by Joshua Bloom and Waldo E. Martin Jr. I initially listened to this on audiobook, but I got my copy part of the way through reading it, and I'm in the middle of kind of going through and tabbing up stuff that I had marked in the book. It's a slower process because unfortunately the audiobook doesn't have chapters, so it's making my life a little bit more difficult. Plus I just kind of like to read this more. This is a very chunky book, and I ended up listening to it in like a week, and that's a lot to process, so I'm taking my time reading and going through. But this was excellent. I've read other stuff on like social movements and stuff like that before, and on specific groups. Actually, in 2020, I read a really good one on ACT UP that specifically looked at emotion. So this one was really wonderful, and their main premise was kind of looking at not the politics of the group and the politics of the time, and what enabled the group to become what it was within that specific historical moment. Because at least in the history classes that I was in, the Black Panthers weren't really talked about, or if they were, it was like a side note, and they were seen as just like really angry militant black men, and that was the extent. But they got a lot of shit done. They got popular really, really quickly and did a whole lot of really great mutual aid stuff. They started the breakfast program that is what government breakfast programs are based off of. They did a lot in regards to medical care. They did research into sickle cell anemia, and they also did a lot of organizing around police brutality. One of the big things that they're known for are following the police around, watching the police with firearms, because police brutality was such a problem and continues to be a problem. It was actually kind of surreal to listen to this book. They're talking about police brutality and somebody being killed in their own home, then putting it down, going to TikTok, and learning about Amir Locke, who was also murdered in his own home. So, I mean, there are so many reasons why we should be looking at stuff like this, and because this stuff is still happening. This is the history, but it's not that far in the past. And the shit that enabled this to happen is still happening. They also talk about the things like the role of different universities in all of this. There were quite a few universities who got behind some of the movements, the Free Huey movement, and other things like that. And a big piece of why this group was able to get so much success in such a short amount of time where they were at had to do with the draft as well. People were very anti-draft overwhelmingly. I am just rambling about random bits and pieces that I learned in this book. This is not a comprehensive review. All that is to say, there's a lot going on in here. I really like how they go into these like different bits and pieces, talking about the group more holistically, talking about the background of what was going on politically, and then they also get into what the Panthers actually believed. They talk about the different tenets and go a little bit into who they were reading to, because there's a pretty robust list of people that and things that they were expected to read in order to join the group. And then in the conclusion, they talk about what was different in that time and like how that compares to today's time, which I thought was really cool. Now, this was, I think, originally published in 2013. And then there's I think a new intro from 2016. So I would be really interested to see what these authors say about how it, what this would look like if it was written today, because a lot has happened since 2016. So this was excellent. I highly recommend it if you're interested in this group or learning about Black history and the Black Power movement in a more comprehensive way. As, chunky as this is, I think that it's fairly accessible for something that's more academic. I mentioned Moving Politics, which was about ACT UP, and that, when I reviewed it, I talked about the fact that it was kind of a little bit, had some places with more dense academic language, and this didn't have that same issue. So I think that as far as academic books go, this is more accessible, though it is kind of big. But this was very good. So far as readathons go, this fits for Joanne because it's nonfiction, Angel because it has anti-capitalist themes, and Collins because this is a book that taught me something. After that, I can get into the graphic novels that I read. I read Sheets by Brenna Thummler. This was the story of a girl whose family owns a laundromat. Her mom just died, and she's basically running it in a large part, even though she's only like 12. It's her story and the story of this ghost kind of converging. It's very cute. I didn't know a whole lot about it going in, but it does, deal with some heavy stuff. She's grieving her mom. The ghost is like kind of dealing with certain things about being dead. But it wasn't too heavy. It's a middle grade graphic novel. There were parts of it that were rushed. So it would have been nice if that were kind of drawn out more, but I do understand kind of the restraints that they probably had with this. But overall, it was very cute. So far as the readathons go, Sheets fit the Rent readathon, prompt for Mimi to read a graphic novel. And then after that, I read Across a Field of Starlight. And this was so good. I fucking adored this. This is another graphic novel, but it's young adult. It is the story of two non-binary people who were born in totally different solar systems, who end up happening upon each other and being able to connect, and the universe kind of brings them back together. This is set in space. Both of them are a part of different groups, but both of the groups are against the main empire that exists, that's kind of taking over everything. Fasten grows up in a group that is more of a military force against them, that's very hyper-capitalistic and individualistic, very focused on military. Whereas Lou grew up on a commune. They don't necessarily have like a military force that fights with the Empire, but it's built from people who defected from the Empire. So this had a really interesting conversation about like politics and what it's like to be born in such different cultures. And I think that the kind of issues that brings with it was done in a really realistic way. They end up finding each other when they're kids. Fasten crash lands on a planet, I think, and Lou happens to be on that planet with their family crew kind of researching things, because that's what they decide to do kind of with the time that they have, is to research and understand the world. Lou helps Fasten contact the people back on their planet and gives them this machine where they have the ability to talk to each other even in totally different places. And it kind of goes from there. I don't want to say too much, but it's really awesome. And even just like the artwork is, not only is it like just generally speaking it's cute. I like the way that color is used, but the biggest thing is the character design. The character design is incredibly diverse. And that's not only looking at, like, you can see the main characters are non-binary people of color. That's pretty cool. There is also an incredible amount of body difference. One of the main characters is plus size. You have quite a few other characters who are built in completely different ways, who have completely different types of gender expression, or different ages. It's not really common to see, a character in much of anything, particularly young adult and graphic novels that are really kind of older, but there are a few characters like that. There's a prominent character who is, I think, a trans man or transmasculine and is on hormones and binds, and that is explicitly detailed, and like it's talked about how like he accesses some of that within this world. There's also a character who is feminine but is like 6'2", built like a tank, and has like a full beard and stuff. So there's an array of gender expressions, and I don't know, it's just really cool. I will say the end was rushed. But again, I think that's the constraint of having a one-off book like this. I would have loved to see them really go through some of this a little bit more. And as much as I liked, like, some of what was being said, like, politically within the messaging, there was some stuff that I've got questions about that I think could have been addressed better if they had been able to kind of draw the ending out. So I still gave it 5 stars. I fucking adored this. This is best graphic novel that I've read all year, which I don't think I've read a ton of graphic novels this year. But this is probably gonna be in the top books that I read this year. It was incredible. So far as the Rent Readathon goes, this fits all of the prompts for Angel. It has anti-capitalist themes, it centers love, and it has trans representation. It fits Collins because it's science fiction and has a queer person of color. It fits Mimi because it's a graphic novel, and Jonathan Larson because it is set in the future, I guess. I kind of assumed it was the future because it's space. Maybe it's not, but I'm gonna go with it. Next, I read Teaching to Transgress, Education as the Practice of Freedom by Bell Hooks. I read this as an audiobook, and I am so glad I was able to pick it up. I really loved this. This is a collection of essays and interviews by Bell Hooks talking about education. In the beginning, she talks about her experience with education, like learning as a child. She was initially going to a school with Black teachers, Black students, because of segregation, and she talks about how education felt very different once stuff was segregated because she was put with white teachers. When segregation happened, a lot of the schools opted to keep white teachers. And so she talked about how there was a shift there because while initially she was really excited to learn, discover, explore. There was kind of a legacy behind, like she kind of knew the people who were teaching her. So that shifted a lot and into education as just retaining information rather than being about actually exploring yourself and exploring ideas. And then from there, she talks about kind of how she's looked at education, how she didn't really plan on being a teacher. She more has had an identity as a writer. And she talks a lot about how education should be used in a way to kind of more fully understand the world around you, be able to use it in order to create change. It was fucking phenomenal. I was super stoked about this book after reading it, and it's made me really excited to read Pedagogy of the Oppressed, because she talks about that specifically, and that's been on my list for a while. So I would highly recommend this if you're a teacher. I teach college. I'm a women's and gender studies teacher, and have taught sociology in the past. But, and I try to have a classroom where it's less teacher talking at students and like retaining information. I try to keep it more discussion based and stuff like that. And letting the students be able to take these ideas and incorporate them into what they already know. And so they're able to use like a feminist lens to look at different issues within their life. And even though I already have kind of a less, I think, typical view on how a classroom should be run, this still gave me so many more ideas and so many more things that I still need to unpack. So this was incredible. Highly recommend that. So far as the Rent Readathon goes, this fit prompts for Joanne, which is to read a nonfiction, Angel to read a book with anti-capitalist themes, and Collins, which is to read a book that teaches you something or is about a teacher. Then after this, I read The Tradition by Jericho Brown. And this was a poetry collection. And it was one that I've been thinking about for a while. I haven't heard a ton about it. I feel like I've seen it here and there on Bookstagram. But really what brought me in was the cover. This is one that, working at a bookstore, there are lots of books that I see all the time. And I'm like, one day, one day. And I saw it at the library, so that was the day. And it was really excellent. It was very well written. The author is a queer black man, kind of talking about his experiences. In particular, this focuses on the issue of violence and how it's incorporated kind of into the everyday in a lot of ways. Don't get me wrong, there were some kind of pieces that focused more on joy, but that was one of the overarching themes, and it was very impactful. I highly recommend it. So far as the Rent Readathon goes, this covers Mark, which is to read a biography or memoir. It's about himself, so I thought that, poetry collection still covered that. It covers Maureen, which is to read a book of poetry, Joanne, which is to read nonfiction, Collins by a queer person of color, and Mimi, because this talks about HIV and AIDS and his experience with that. Which I think that it's interesting that it ended up being queer and about someone with HIV, because I didn't know either of those things picking it up. So it figures that one of the ones that I kind of pick up without knowing too much about, it's gay. So that's pretty cool. After that, I can talk about the kids' books that I read. I read The Duck Who Didn't Like Water and The Creature of Habit. These were both cute art. The Duck Who Didn't Like Water is about a duck who doesn't like water, who ends up becoming friends with a frog who's lost. Once he gets the frog back home, he realized how much he really loved the frog. It's cute. I think that the story could have been more developed even for like a kid's story. There could have been more there to like show their connection, but it was still adorable and I still teared up reading it. So there's that. And then The Creature of Habit is about this little guy who lives on an island, does the same thing every day. Somebody comes to visit and kind of throws off his groove. He's kind of stressed that this person doesn't follow his same thing. So it's about kind of being okay with changes. And I think that could be super useful for some parents. So it's good stuff. After that, I have a young adult, and that is Rise to the Sun by Leah Johnson. I actually ended up listening to this because I found the audiobook on Hoopla. This is told in multiple perspectives. So we get every other chapter is Olivia or Tony. These girls came to a music festival and kind of each have their own backstory, their own stuff that they're dealing with. Tony is dealing with the loss of her father. She's very much... she doesn't have a ton of friends. She kind of prefers to stay with herself. She has one really good friend who she came to this with. And then Olivia is dealing with this trial that she's in the middle of as a person who was a victim of sexual harassment. Somebody intentionally leaked her nudes. And so both of them have heavy stuff that they're dealing with, but they kind of find each other. It's a cute time. For the most part, I really enjoyed this. I thought that it was pretty cute, their interactions, and really I liked that both of them had, like, in-depth backstories. I will say that this is heavier than it appears. It does look like a pretty light cover, but, I just described what both of their backgrounds are, and some stuff also ends up happening kind of at the concert too. So definitely check out content warnings and stuff like that. I will say, I think I ended up rating this... I haven't really talked about star ratings for any of these, but I ended up rating this, I think, just barely under 4 stars. And I thought that the way that some stuff happened towards the end of the story regarding the romance specifically, a lot of stuff happens throughout this, but some of the stuff specifically in the romance towards the end, like, the way that it played out was weird for me, just because this is all happening, like, this whole book happens within, like the course of a weekend. So the fact that some stuff happens in such quick succession near the end just was not really believable, even within the context of young adult. So that was a little off-putting, and I thought that the way that they reacted with some stuff was kind of eh. But for the most part, this is really good. Solid characters, it's cute, and I'm really looking forward to reading Leah Johnson's other book, which is also available as an audiobook on Hoopla, so I'm excited about that. So far as readathons go, this is the first one that I'm talking about that fits for the Blackathon. Well, I did end up reading a lot by Black authors. They just didn't end up fitting the prompts as well as I thought they would. But this one fits because it has neon on the cover. That is some bright pink and bright yellow. And arguably, you could make a case for the first one as well, because it, with Tony specific, well, actually with both of them, they talk about friendship on different levels, and also family. It's not, I think the duality between found and blood family isn't super prevalent, but it still does talk about bonds within found family and also different things happening around regular family. Then in terms of the Rent readathon, this fit for Roger because it's about music. They're at a music festival. They perform. It's a contemporary, which also makes it fit for Roger. It fits for Maureen because one of the main characters is bisexual, and says bisexual. It, I think, fits for Joanne because, so Olivia is explicitly bisexual. Tony, I don't know if she ever says her sexuality, but they make an allusion to the fact that she doesn't like guys. So I'm thinking that means she's a lesbian. And then this also fits for Angel because this centers around romance or love. And Collins because this is about queer people of color. Then, after that, I read All About Love by Bell Hooks. I'm probably not going to be able to go into this as much as I kind of initially wanted to, because I'm running short on time. I really went into this wanting to love this. I like Bell Hooks. I just got done talking about her book on education and fucking loved it. I use one of Bell Hooks' pieces in one of my classes. I like a lot of what she's put out. The first, 5 chapters of this was solid. She talks in depth about what love can look like and talks about love as a verb rather than as a feeling. And the fact that love and abuse cannot coexist if we're using this framework. And talks about the implications of what a lot of people learn as a result of childhood, talks about her own childhood, and a lot of that was just really wonderful and really important, honestly. It's something that people really need to digest and internalize. And she goes on to talk about why we need to use, center love in a lot of ways, and why we need to be going out of our way to love people and focusing on love. And she talks about a love ethic, and how she also mentions how with the way that the general world's understanding of love is so warped, how that is influenced by a lot of things around the culture, in particular capitalism, white supremacy. All of that is great. However, chapter 7 is where it lost me. And I just got done saying that she mentions the culture and the issue that capitalism has with kind of this idea of the overly greedy, materialistic, individualistic kind of complex that's pushed on people is antithetical to this idea of going out of your way to love people for who they are and not what they have. But when she actually starts talking about it, when she starts going into greed and the impact that greed has on the general population, I don't think that any or very much of that larger, more complex societal critique comes through at all. She talks about how individual people's individual actions are informed by greed, which I do think is important, but I think that it is missing just an incredible piece of the picture when you're talking about people who are in poverty acting out of greed, when the society that they're in, the poverty that they're in, is a direct result of other people's greed. And so I think that not kind of having that conversation was a huge miss for me, and was honestly really, really impacted the way that I read the rest of the book, because it was just hugely missing, especially because I think that this idea of an ethic of love and looking at capitalism and the white supremacist colonialist society as antithetical to love, it makes total sense, and I can totally see how it fits in. And I thought a little bit about Discourse on Colonialism, where one of the big things that he talks about is the fact that to colonize is to lose pieces of your humanity. And I thought that would have fit in really well with this idea of the love ethic, but it just doesn't come through. She talks about how, I think in particular, some of the things that really rubbed me the wrong way was when she brought up prison, because she said a lot of people are in prison because they acted out of greed. Doesn't talk about how the whole prison system exists because of people's greed, because they wanted to continue to have slave labor. That's just an incredible oversight to me. And she also talks about addiction, and talks about addiction as a manifestation of greed, which can be true only in that the culture of greed separates us from other people. And that sort of separation feeds the mental illness, the depression and all of that facilitates addiction. So I was very disappointed at how incredibly unnuanced big chunks of chapter 7 were. And from that, you know, some of what she says and the rest is good. Some of it, it's like there are blips that are really cool, and then she never develops them. And it's like, I want that. I want to see the glimmer of what you're putting out. But it didn't happen. And I was really disappointed. I definitely think that it's worth reading. It's better than other self-help books. A lot of self-help books are real bad. But I was hoping for a more, a better social analysis, and I didn't get it. And that was really disappointing. And I'm going to have to talk to you about how this fits in with the Rent Readathon and the final book that I read when I get back from class, because I should have left 5 minutes ago. And we're back the next day. I think that I ended talking about bell hooks. As far as readathons go, this fit with the Blackathon because it talks about blood and found family, I guess. I, again, don't think that it's the best way, and there are some... I take some issue with some of the stuff that she says, like, the nuance that's not there when it comes to, like, forgiving your family and stuff like that. But technically this talks about, like, love and family and whatever. So this could fit for that prompt. And so far as the Rent Readathon goes, this fits Joanne for a nonfiction book, Angel for a book that centers love, Collins about a teacher or teaches you, and I think that's it. Oh, the next book that I read was The Body Is Not an Apology by Sonya Renee Taylor. And this was a much more nuanced look into love and self-love. In this, she shares multiple stories about people's experiences of body shame, of coming to terms kind of with her own self. She pulls from several different people who have talked about love and the like, including actually this piece. She referenced All About Love. But this is mostly focused on some, like, you know, self-reflection. So it's not about the society at large. However, she references systems, and the way that she, you know, brings in a lot of the social issues, I think was done really well, even if that wasn't, like, the focus or whatever, because this is a self-help book. I was familiar with a lot of the ideas going in because I've heard her speak before. I've followed her on social media platforms and stuff like that. So I was kind of familiar with her work and had read bits and pieces here and there. But it's an excellent read. I would definitely recommend it. It kind of works you through unpacking kind of where certain ideas about your body come from, or other people's bodies come from. What ideas do you have to unpack? And it kind of walks you through that in a way. Each chapter does have some reflection questions, although there is a workbook that has more in it. I have not looked at the workbook yet, but it's a good tool if you're kind of on that journey of self-love, or kind of just unpacking your biases around bodies in general. So that one was very good. And it also fits for the Rent Readathon, Joanne for a nonfiction book, Angel, a book that centers love, and Collins, a book by a queer person of color. So those were all the books that I read in the month of February. If you've read any of them, definitely let me know about it in the comments below. And thank y'all so much for watching. Bye.